record so that way for anyone who misses or wants to go back and watch this later, they can. And I'll show you where I'll be posting those here shortly. All right, so I just want to do a quick little introduction, right? So this is APES or AP Environmental Science, and I do need to reiterate the fact that this is not a required class. You are required to have a Earth and an environmental credit to graduate high school. But we have three levels of Earth and environmental. We have Earth and environmental, we have honors Earth and environmental, and we have AP, which stands for Advanced Placement Environmental Science. So you are choosing to take this class, and so you are accepting the responsibilities and challenges that I'm going to present to you, right? So you need to step up to the plate, right? Or you need to make sure that you can chew the size of the bite that you're taking, okay? And remember, you had the first 10 days to decide, but I would suggest trying to make that decision sooner rather than later. I'm not trying to scare you away. This is my absolute favorite class to teach. I love the content. I love teaching it. But it can be challenging, okay? And I'll talk more about that here in a minute. So I am Mr. Christopher Collins. For those of you that I do not know, I recognize a lot of y'all's names. But for those of you that don't, hello. Nice to meet you. I got my undergraduate degree from Appalachian State, a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Secondary Education. Yes, I went to school to become a science teacher, as crazy as that may sound, but I'm actually probably one of the luckiest people on planet Earth because I actually get to do what I love for a job. Most people I know, they hate their job. And then I went and got my master's degree, a master's of science in science education with my focus in microbiology. So the small things that we can't see with our eyes, but still have a tremendous impact, probably a bigger impact than the things that you can actually see with your eye. And I also had to focus with higher education. So, you know, learning what kinds of assessments and strategies to use on your top tier students. I've been teaching at Patton and coaching at Patton for about 7.5 years. So at the end of the year, that'll be my 8th year. I've taught everything from earth science to biology to AP and environmental and the whole spectrum in between. I coach all the running sports, so cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track. I also taught for a year in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is in the northern part of Thailand, and Thailand's in Southeast Asia. I taught math and science international school to elementary, middle school, and high school students. Wonderful experience, and we were able to visit a lot of conservation and preservation areas, so I will bring a lot of that experience into the classroom. And then I spent a year teaching environmental science, marine biology down in the Florida Keys, right? Taking students out scuba diving and snorkeling and working out in the field and helping other professors who are bringing students do their research. And so obviously I'll tie in a lot of oceanography, marine biology, and specific examples of environmental issues that we see in South Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. And then just from personal interest, I moved to Morganton, North Carolina because I'm a rock climber. And believe it or not, I've traveled all over the world and all over the country. And Morganton, North Carolina is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. So I actually chose to move here. I also am an avid gardener. I love plants and I like being able to produce my own food. So it's what I spend a majority of my time doing and thinking about when I'm not rock climbing. I also really enjoy trail running, right? So that's kind of obvious being like the cross country and track coach. I do like running. It allows me to enjoy more miles of trail in a shorter period of time. So I get to see more, do more in less time and get great exercise doing it. When I was younger, I really enjoyed weightlifting. In high school, believe it or not, I played football. And as I've gotten older, it's become more and more important for me to live a sustainable lifestyle, right? And so I consider myself a opportunistic-itarian, right? So I'm not a full-blown vegetarian, but I'm mostly vegetarian. I simply eat meat when someone has raised and prepared it properly, or if someone cooks a nice meal and invites me over, I accept to eat it in that situation. But I try to avoid meat as much as possible. We'll talk why that is later. And I also want to stress the fact that living a sustainable lifestyle doesn't mean you need to do everything perfectly every day. Living a sustainable lifestyle means that you are making attempts each and every single day to maybe do 1, 2, or 3 things better that will reduce your impact on the environment. I also really like traveling the country and the world. I like seeing different people's perspectives and the ways in which they live their lives. I also really like the ocean. So anything scuba diving related or surfing related, I'm always, if it says something to do with outside, I'm in. Right. And my love for nature and my love for being outside is actually what initially birthed my passion for biology. Right. And so I'm fortunate enough to have made a career out of talking about and thinking about and doing what I love, which is nature. Now, as far as the class is concerned, I shared the syllabus with you guys in your Google Classroom. It is your responsibility to read it and know it. Okay, so don't just scroll down to the bottom and sign it, because by typing in your little name, you've told me that you've read it, right? So if later you come pulling your hair out and yelling at me like, well, I didn't know about this, or I don't understand this, but you told me that you read the syllabus, so that's your responsibility. This should say spring 2021, so you can kind of ignore that, but you need to know what's in the syllabus. Attendance does matter. This is an advanced placement course. We're going to be moving 100 miles an hour. So Zooms are not optional. Now, they will be recorded in the event that, maybe you miss it because you're sick, or you've got an appointment, or traveling for something. That's situations come up. That's life. But choosing to take, a couple days off 3 times a week and not attend Zooms is not going to cut it. I will not only mark you absent, you will probably know about the assignments that were due that day, and you'll be missing out on a vast majority of the information that we're going to be covering. Now, if you know you're going to be absent, let me know ahead of time. If I know that I need to miss work, I call my boss as soon as possible and say, hey, I'm not going to be at work. I need to get a sub, and I have to make plans accordingly. And you need to be doing the same. If you have any questions about anything, please don't hesitate to send me an email. But actually, the Remind is the best way, since it actually gives me alerts on my phone. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Grades. Everyone always wants to know about grades. We do have a classroom final in addition to the AP College Board final. So this is an AP class put together by the College Board, and there is a big exam that you can take in May that will earn you college credit if you score high enough. But then I also have my own classroom final that we'll take at the very, very end of the year. That final that we take with me is 10% of your grade. 90% of your grade is going to come down to your daily grind, right? Your exams, your quizzes, your classwork. Your exams do count for 50%. You might be thinking, well, 50, 25, that adds up to 100. Yes, it adds up to 100% of that 90%. But the quizzes and classwork, together they are weighted the same as exams. So if you're not a great exam taker, no sweat. The quizzes and the classwork will be very, very similar. Am I going to be doing recorded lectures like I did for biology? No, I am going to be kind of delivering those, live in the Zooms, and then I record one of my AP Environmental Zooms every day, and I'll post it. Now, there are, and I will share the link to this playlist later, there are playlists that the AP College Board put together for environmental science specifically. So if you just want to hear it from another perspective, or you want to get ahead, you will have that option, and I'll share that with you guys later. But thank you for asking. All right, expectations. Everything that we're going to be doing is recorded, so don't say anything or do anything that your Mima or Papa or Mimi or whatever you call them would be disappointed to hear or to see. All school rules still apply, and as I pointed out, attendance matters, especially in this class, AP Environmental. We're going to be covering a lot. The class schedule for us, second period, is 9:45 to 10:45, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesdays are for asynchronous learning. So you'll have assignments and videos and things you'll be working on your own. We will not have a Zoom on Wednesdays. That is not to say that if for some reason you need extra help or an extra explanation or tutoring, that you can set up a private tutoring session on Wednesdays. I also have some office hours from about 8 in the morning to about 8:20, and from about 2:15 till 3 o'clock, which is in the syllabus, that you can set up little personal, like, hey, I need help, or I just don't understand, or I need to get caught up. In the weekly outline, I'll be talking about this here in just a second. So before we move any further, how many of you guys have joined the class Remind for AP Environmental Science? You need to do this, because I will use the Remind as probably one of the primary forms of communication and my way of delivering updates and information. So you need to join the Remind. I just put the link in the chat. If you have not done that already, that is your responsibility right now. You cannot send me a message tomorrow or on Wednesday, hey, I didn't know about that because I didn't join the Remind, because you're sitting here right now. I've marked you present. And so if I've marked you present and you don't join the Remind, then I know you're not listening, and that's not up to a good start. So please join the Remind. This is also the best way to message me directly if you have a question, because it gives me an alert on my phone. I get a million emails a day, so the Remind is much better. and much faster. All right, the next thing you need to make sure to have joined is our Google Classroom, right? And so you need to make sure that you're in second period, because second period and first period are slightly different. And I'm going to go ahead and toss the link in the chat as well if you have not joined that. The Google Classroom is where I'm going to be giving you lots and lots of information, resources, and assignments. So you will not be able to be successful if you don't join this. So please make sure to do that. Don't send me an email on Wednesday saying I didn't know because I'm not in the Google Classroom yet. They'll say I marked you present and I went over this. So you need to make sure to join the Google Classroom. Clicking that link, I think, signs you up right away. All right. And I'll talk more about the Google Classroom shortly, but I want to make sure that everyone joins everything that needs to be joined. And then we have AP Classroom. AP Classroom is the platform that we will be using for our assessments, our quizzes and our exams and little TQs and things like that. And that'll make sense later. But for second period, I've got a little join code. Let me go ahead and copy this for you guys. Okay, so to join the AP Classroom, you need to go to this link, myap.collegeboard.org, and you need to use this passcode. And all this information has already been shared with you in prior emails, and it's also on the Google Classroom, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So your first assignment that's due tonight at 11:59 p.m. is actually on AP Classroom, the AP College Board Classroom. So you need to join, right? So don't send me an email tomorrow saying, well, I couldn't complete it because I didn't join the AP College Board. I'm going to ask you, why didn't you join? That was a part of the assignment, is taking that initiative and getting signed up. When you do sign up, you might even see that the TQ 1.1 has already been assigned to you. That's the assignment that's due at 11:59. I'll talk more about that later. All right, so let's take a look at the Google Classroom, right? Let's take a little tour, right? So here you have the little stream. You'll get announcements and some due dates, your syllabus and student info. Please get those in by Friday. But let's go to classwork, okay? So the help desk has some important stuff. If you go to important links, this document right here, in case you missed the links and passcodes and stuff I had provided in the chat or the emails, you got your Zoom link, your Remind, and your AP Classroom link and passcode in there. So if you forget, you can always go back and rejoin. I've also got the AP reading list. This will make more sense here in a minute. In this reading list, I break down the topics and units by the reading. So that, like today, for example, your assignment is to complete the topic questions for 1.1. So you can see 1.1, 1.1, 1.1. And so chapter 8, pages 154 through 158 would be where you'd want to go read to make sure that you're kind of up to speed or up to date. And this is a living document, right? So every unit, I'll add unit 1, unit 2, and you'll see those down here along the bottom, right? So that'll make it really easy for you guys to navigate. And since you guys aren't here, we actually have a virtual textbook. I'll show you in a second. Here is the plan for Schedule C. So just in case you're like, oh man, what time does that class start? And so that's there for you. And there's also student expectation, teacher expectation, and parent expectations in there for you as well. So just some like resources for you. All right, let's go to the library. So obviously the library is exactly that. Any of the readings that we'll be using will be in the library, okay? And so if it's from my virtual textbook, I'll actually put a chapter like chapter 8, chapter 6, and then there'll be other readings, which are like little PDFs and documents that I've kind of accumulated over the years that have really good information in them. And you'll know when you need to read them because I will point them out here. This right here is probably one of the single most important documents that I have provided for you. And anyone who's taken my, biology class last semester in the fall knows that this is very, very important. And this will help you be very successful. So every Monday or Sunday, I will post this. And it's kind of a checklist. You'll get to know on Monday exactly what we're doing for the entire week. So get a paper pencil planner so that you can write these things down. You can create yourself a little spreadsheet or a checklist, and so that you'll never miss an assignment. You'll never fall behind. And for some of you guys, you'll actually be ahead, right? Now, each day has like a little checklist, right? And it goes all the way through Friday. And then I have another checklist, and it has the list of assignments that were to be turned in. right? Or at least worked on that particular week. And then I've added updates and reminders. So some like preview of things to come. Like next Wednesday, we'll have our quiz on biogeochemical cycles. Our Birds of Western North Carolina research is due the 15th. And so you can kind of see things here. These PCs, MCQs, and FRQs, these are like our equivalent of exams, right? These progress checks, and that kind of will be the summation of everything we learned in Unit 1. And so you can already go and mark your calendar, and you can see that that date has yet to be announced, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at what we need to do today. We're in our Zoom. We talk about student info, syllabus. We, gave you a little Google Classroom tour. And in just a second, we're going to dive into our first lesson, our PowerPoint. And then you can see here that I've got a reading. And I usually try to list them in the order in which I would do them, right? And so after our little lesson, some point today, you'll need to read chapter 8, pages 154 through 158, right? And you can find that in the library. Once you've read that, then you're probably ready and you're probably prepared to tackle the TQ 1.1. And you can find that in AP Classroom, and that's due tonight at 11:59 p.m. I think it's actually 11:45 p.m. I don't think AP Classroom let me type in 11:59 now, so I need to change that. And the TQs they'll range anywhere from 2 to 5, maybe 8 multiple choice questions. I think the one that you're taking today is 3 multiple choice questions. But they're important questions, right? And you need to take your time on them, because if there's only 3, if you miss one of them, that's 30 points, right? So if you get 1 right, it's 30, 2 right? It's what, 66? And then, so you need to take your time with them. They're open note, right? And so you can use the PowerPoint. You can use any notes that you write while I'm talking. And you can use the chapter 8, the reading, right? And honestly, if I were you, how I would do this class is while I'm talking to you guys, just sit back and listen. Have a conversation and think, kind of digest what I'm saying, and then maybe ask a question every now and then. And then when I would take notes, what I would do is while I'm reading, right, I'd pull up the reading online, I'd get out some paper, and as I'm reading, I'm like, you know what, that sounds important, or that word is in bold. I should write that down. And then you'll have that kind of annotated, shortened version of your reading on a single page that you can have laying out in front of you when you take your topic questions, right? And then you can see that, each day you'll have a very, very similar flow. Now, these topic questions, I will be, for this first week, assigning them each day, so you can't work ahead. But as the semester progresses, a lot of these TQs I will assign on Monday, and so that you can read and accomplish those or work on those kind of at your leisure. Now, there will be certain things that are day designated. So there'll be things like these AP daily videos that I'll be assigning to you on Wednesdays that'll need to be viewed on those days and those days only, okay? So yeah. And again, we're just going to take it one day at a time this week until we kind of catch our flow. So let's go ahead and take a look at PowerPoint number 1. Where are you going to find this number 1 PowerPoint? Well, we're diving into our first unit on ecosystems. And so all the materials and assignments and things you'll need that go along with this will be right here under Unit 1, Ecosystems. So you can see PPT for PowerPoint. I know it's a Google slide, but I learned PowerPoint first, so I call them all PowerPoints. Although this is not a PowerPoint, I get it. All right, so let's get started. And so, the environmental science curriculum, AP College Board has kind of laid it out there that, to be really, really successful in this class, or the classes you should have taken before this would have been like chemistry, physical science, or biology, or earth science. You would have had a lot of high school science classes already. So there's going to be quite a bit of information that I'm going to move through pretty quick, with the expectation of that you've learned this in middle school, or you learned this in other science classes you've taken in high school, or if you don't, especially for some of this biology and earth science stuff, that you'll have to take some initiative outside of the classroom and be like, whoa, Mr. Collins said eukaryote. I don't know what the heck that is, right? And that might be something you want to look up, right? Because I don't have time to teach you guys chemistry, physical science, and biology, and environmental science all at the same time. That's not to say that as a freshman, not having had all that experience, you cannot be successful. I do have, and I have had plenty of freshmen make 4s and 5s on the AP exam, but they work hard, right? A freshman who makes a 4 or 5 is going to have to work harder than a junior who makes a 4 and 5, because the junior has probably already had chemistry, already had biology, it already had earth science, right? And so they have a lot more background knowledge. But it's not to say that you can't do that. All right, so ecosystems, what the heck are they, right? Well, it's a system of interactions between two components, the biotic and the abiotic. The biotic, bio meaning life, are the living things, the living biological communities found within that particular system. And you may hear people refer to flora and fauna, like plants and animals, but I don't like that because it's, I think, disrespectful. We're forgetting about the fungi and the protists and all the bacteria and archaea out there. Just because they're small doesn't mean that they're not important. As you'll learn in this semester, over the course of the semester, that the little things are probably the more important things in our ecosystems. And so biotic means living. And then you've got the abiotic, right? The non-living. In science, if you see that prefix A before something, it usually means like not or non. So this is non-living. These non-living environmental factors are kind of like the conditions. So if you walk out into your yard or you walk out into the woods behind your house, you can study that little micro ecosystem, right? You first might look at the abiotic, right? You're like, how is it sunny out here? Is it dark? Is it windy? What temperature is it? How much rain is there? And then you might look at the soil, right? Is the soil clay? Is it sand? Is it silt? Is the soil dry? Is it porous? Is it permeable? You might have a little pH meter and you might, what is it, acidic? Is it basic? Is it neutral? You might look at the moisture content of the soil. And then you might even do a nutrient test, kind of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, right? So those are all non-living things though. And you can even look at the air, right? So what percent of the air is water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen? Are there other trace gases that you could potentially study or look in the environment of interest? And then if you were looking at an aquatic ecosystem, maybe like a koi pond or a lake in your backyard, you could look at pH, right? Salinity, like dissolved salts, dissolved oxygen, right? So how much oxygen is actually dissolved in the water. You can look at nutrients again, right? Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And you could also look at something known as turbidity, right? And if you heard that word turbid before, turbidity is just like how murky is it, right? So crystal clear water has low turbidity, and then like, you know, hot chocolate, right? Or a liquid that you can't see through is very, very turbid, right? So if it hasn't rained in a while, you know, the Catawba River, the turbidity lowers. You can actually see the bottom. And then after a heavy rainstorm, all that clay washes in, it becomes very turbid. You can't really see through it. And that affects light, the ability of light to penetrate the water. And the biological communities in your backyard would be like the plants, the animals, the fungi, you know, all of the living things. And we call them communities because they're a number of different populations, like the plant populations, the animal populations, the fungal populations, the bacterial populations, all kind of living together in that community. Now, there are lots of different interactions that exist within this biological community, right? So these populations of different organisms are going to be interacting. And there's three main, I guess, like groups of interactions. You've got the predator-prey interaction or relationship. You've got symbiotic relationships. Symbiosis simply means living with or living together. And then you've got competition, which is pretty self-explanatory, right? So there's limited resources in an ecosystem, and sometimes organisms try to compete over them. But these relationships are all dependent on resource availability, right? Certain resources might be more abundant or more limited in a particular ecosystem. And that's usually the biggest driving factor or influence behind these relationships. You change the resource availability, you might change these relationships. Certain resources are far more important than others. We actually call those limiting factors. Some examples of limiting factors that really motivate or really influence these relationships would be like space, right? How much space is there in this particular ecosystem? How much water is in this particular ecosystem? If you're looking at, you know, species or competition within a single species, you might have like mate availability. And then for like soil for plants, might be something like phosphorus. Phosphorus tends to be like the number one limiting factor for any ecosystem, really. Well, let's talk about predator-prey. And you might think, well, this is a pretty intuitive relationship, right? The predator controls the prey. It's like a cat and mouse game. But it's not, right? If you really look at the relationship, you realize that it's intimate and that this relationship benefits both organisms, and it actually works in both ways. And you're like, what? How in the world does the rabbit benefit from being hunted by the fox or the wolf? And I'm going to get to that. If you look at this graph on the y-axis, we've got the number of individuals, and on the x-axis, we have time. And you can see that over time, the number of individuals fluctuates, right? And you can see that there's this cyclical pattern, right? The green being the rabbit or the prey, and the red being the fox or the predator in this example. And in that classic idea of cat and mouse, you think the cat is like king, right? Controlling the population. But if you really look at this graph, you'll realize that it's not necessarily a one-way street, right? If you look right here at this increase, right? Why is the rabbit population increasing? Well, the rabbit population is increasing here because the coyote population experienced a significant decrease. And then it starts to increase again, right? The foxes and predators start to increase again, not because they're the almighty champion of the universe, but because the growing prey population supported a greater number of individuals, right? And then as the predator population increases, the prey population decreases. So they're kind of stuck in this intimate twirl or cyclical dance, right? Now, how do they both benefit each other? Well, which hare or rabbit is the fox going to catch? Well, the predators typically hunt or, pick out the sick, the weak, and the elderly. The sick, the weak, and the elderly can compromise the population of rabbits, right? The weaker rabbits might be weaker because of a genetic disorder or a malformed foot or something like that. And we don't necessarily want those genes to be retained in that population. That could cause problems for future generations of rabbit. And so the slower, weaker rabbit gets eaten. And if the rabbit gets eaten, it's probably not going to reproduce and it's not going to pass on its genes. The sick rabbit might be sick because of its immune system. And maybe the immune system didn't have the capable antibodies to prevent this infection. And so the fox eats the sick rabbit, and that particular, genetic combination for that immune system is removed from that population. And you might be thinking, well, not everyone gets sick because they've got a problem with their immune system when we all just get sick. Well, what benefit is there from the predator eating the sick individual? If that little rabbit gets eaten because it's sick before it gets home, it's probably not going to spread that sickness to the rest of the rabbits, right? So you're kind of permanently quarantining that individual, right? You get really tense examples of how these relationships can affect the population. And then the elderly rabbits, they might be past the reproductive prime, right? So they're still eating and taking up space and drinking water, but they're not reproducing. And so the fox is more likely to eat that, and that benefits the stronger, younger, healthier rabbits. And you might be thinking, whoa, Mr. Collins, this sounds dark, not like a plot of a Disney movie. Well, it's not. This is nature. But that benefits the population. That might be like, oh no, the rabbit got eaten, right? Yes, it's bad for that individual rabbit, but it's good for that population because the stronger rabbits are going to survive, and they're probably stronger because of their genetics. They're going to pass on those genes to future generations, and that population of rabbit will become more well adapted to its predator pressure. That's natural selection and evolution in a nutshell. Now, which of the predators will be able to catch the rabbits as they get stronger and faster? Well, the wolf that's born with maybe partial blindness because of a genetic mutation is not going to be able to see the rabbits, not going to be able to catch them. The rabbit or the fox or the wolf eventually starves, doesn't pass on its genes, and then that problem is no longer present in that particular population. But the exceptionally strong, well-sighted, good senses, fast, intelligent foxes and wolves are going to be successful. And since they're going to be successful predators, they're going to have more offspring, and their offspring are probably going to have a lot of those same genetic traits. And then as the wolves age, obviously, they won't be as fast or as strong, and that will reduce their survivorship, right? And so the sick, the weak, and the elderly foxes and predators, will not be as successful, not be as likely to reproduce, and will eventually become deceased. And that changes the kind of dynamic of the population. So they do need each other. And we will look at examples of what happens when you remove the predators. Another type of relationship is symbiosis. Symbiosis. Okay, and there's a couple different types of symbiotic relationships. Hold on, I got somebody asking a question. Yeah, exactly. It's survival of the fittest in a nutshell. So symbiosis means living with, and there's a couple different examples, right? And so here we have the different types of symbiosis or different types of interactions between organisms. And then let's say effect on X. Let's say this is species X or species Y. We got some examples. Neutralism is neutral, right? So neither organism is affected by the other. Like wolves and lichen don't necessarily have a lot of interactions between the two of them directly. Lichen, or is that crusty stuff that grows on trees and rocks, right? It itself is a good example of a symbiotic relationship, but it doesn't really have much of a relationship with wolves. Amensalism is really neat, right? And I'll get to penicillium and bacteria in a second, but amensalism is one organism could care less, but the other organism is hurt, right? Or its survivorship, its likelihood of surviving is decreased. A good example of amensalism is a black walnut tree. Black walnut trees produce a toxic compound that they secrete from the roots and then put it in their leaves. When the leaves fall in the fall and decompose, the soil eventually accumulates this particular toxin. I think it's called like jugalone or something like that. And it's poisonous or toxic to other plants. So if you see a black walnut, normally there's not a lot of other plants growing underneath it. And that's good for the black walnut because now it's not competing for space, but it's not affected by this toxin. It doesn't bother the black walnut or even seedling black walnuts nearby, but other plants are affected by it. Penicillium is a fungus that produced a natural occurring antibiotic that we eventually isolated into penicillin. And that compound doesn't affect penicillium, the fungus, but it does hurt bacteria, right? So this is another example of amensalism. Amensalism and neutralism, we're probably not going to talk a bunch about those. Commensalism, we will. Commensalism is one organism benefits and the other could care less. I don't really like this example, right? But it makes sense, right? So the tiger hunts, kills something, eats its share of the food, and then walks away to take a nap. And then the jackal shows up afterwards and eats the scraps, right? So the jackal benefited from the tiger, but the tiger could care less. The tiger had already gotten its fill. Commensalism, you can think about trees and birds, right? So a tree might have a bird nest in it, and the bird benefits from having that tree to build its nest and to roost in. But if I knock that bird nest down or that bird never comes back to nest in that tree, it's probably not going to affect the likelihood of that tree surviving. However, if I cut that tree down, right, I could significantly affect the survivorship of that songbird, right? So the bird benefits, but the tree could care less. Competition, like I said before, both individuals, right, are harmed by this relationship, right? Lion and cheetah competing directly over a resource. And I'm going to go into greater detail about competition here in a second. Mutualism, both parties benefit. So like pollinating insects and mammals and birds, they benefit from flowers. They are fed by the nectar. And the flowers are the sexual reproductive organs of angiosperms, flowering plants. And so they get to have sexual reproduction. They get pollinated by the pollinators, which allows them to reproduce sexually, which increases the genetic diversity of the next generation. Now, some flowers can reproduce asexually or kind of reproduce with themselves, but that decreases the variation of the next generation, and that could decrease their potential for adapting to changing environments. Another good example of mutualism where both parties benefit, us and the bacteria in our intestines, right? So yes, I masticate my food, chew my food up, I swallow it, and the pH in my stomach, the acids denature a lot of the proteins and things. And there are some enzymes that we secrete to help break down things. But at the end of the day, it's bacteria that do a majority of our digestion. They live lower in our digestive tract, and they benefit from us eating, and we benefit from them helping us digest things, right? So really, at the end of the day, we chew our food up to feed it to bacteria. The bacteria break it down and then release their wastes. And then those wastes get assimilated or absorbed into our bloodstreams and eventually assimilated into our tissues, right? Without the bacteria, we die. And without us, the bacteria die. And then predation or parasitism. Let's talk about parasitism. Parasitism, one organism benefits and the other is hurt by this. Praying mantis and bumblebee, that's predation, right? So praying mantis benefits from eating the bumblebee. Bumblebee obviously is not too happy about that situation. But parasitism would be like a tick, biting you in your neck. The tick benefits because it's feeding on the sugars and the proteins and the fats in your bloodstream, but you're hurt by that because your body put forth a lot of effort to get those nutrients that the tick is literally just sucking out of you, right? And there's a lot of really weird examples of parasitism. There are certain birds that will actually parasitize other birds' nests. I think it's a cowbird. Could be misspeaking though. That bird comes to a nest, knocks out the eggs, lays its eggs, flies away, never returns. Well, the other bird flies back, looks at it, thinks, they look a little different, but I'm a bird. And I'll sit down on it and I'll incubate those eggs. And that bird will raise the hatchlings and fledglings of the other bird, maybe even the other species. That's parasitism. right? Because the bird that laid the eggs gets to propagate its genes, right, without doing any of the work. The other bird has to do all the work, and those aren't its birds. Those aren't its babies. And then you've got competition, right? So this is a really famous experiment, I think in like the 50s or something like that. Paramecium are just small unicellular eukaryotes. They're just really small protists you find like swimming in ponds and things. And so they grew them, right? This y-axis is their relative population density, right? So population low, high, and then time. And if you grow these organisms separately, you get this neat S-curve, right? So the population is growing, growing, and growing, and eventually it's limited by space, water, resources, and reaches the carrying capacity. And this species, you can see, doesn't grow as fast, but it reaches a similar carrying capacity or similar population number if they're grown separately. But if we put them in the same petri dish, something really odd happens. The red paramecium seems to follow a very similar trend of growth and population, slowly reaching the carrying capacity. But our other paramecium, our little green guy right here, he starts out okay, but then eventually levels off and then starts to decrease over time. Well, what's going on here? These two organisms must be competing over a resource. There must be something in this petri dish that they both need equally. And if they're growing in a petri dish, pretty obvious. It's going to be like water, space, and probably whatever form of nutrition was provided to them. And this is an example of what is known as the competitive exclusion principle. Competition causes exclusion. And if you're excluded from something, it means you're left out. And you can see that because these two organisms are directly competing over something, one wins and the other loses. In nature, there's no like consolation, thanks for trying, participation trophy. You either win or you lose. You're either first or you're last. And so this organism is more well adapted for its particular environment than this one, right? However, you can't say that this organism is decreasing because it wasn't well adapted for its environment, because if you grow it separately in the same environment by itself, it does fine. But this particular organism has a competitive advantage. And so because of the competitive exclusion principle, they cannot coexist together. Now, there's two types of competition. You've got interspecific and intraspecific. Interspecific, if you notice the E there in inter, is different species. So inter, E, and different. So competition between a hummingbird and an insect for the nectar in a flower. That is interspecific. They are not the same species. A bird and an insect, completely different groups of animals, right? And then maybe a competition between a shark and a dolphin, right? Again, different species. And this can create different interactions, right? And this can affect the dynamics between those two species and even their behaviors. And then intraspecific, the A in intra reminds me same. Same has an A, intra has an A. That's how I remember this. Intraspecific competition would be like species or organisms of the same species, maybe songbirds, like a cardinal, right? Maybe you have two male cardinals and they're competing for their mate, right? And so they're competing within their same species. And that has a different dynamic, right? So that's going to create changes in the complexity of that population that would be different than interspecific. Because there's lots of songbirds, right? Cardinal competing with a chickadee and a sparrow, that's interspecific. That competition is different than when you compete within your species. And probably one of the biggest examples of intraspecific is mating, right? And that puts a lot of pressure on individuals within a species, as they relate to one another, trying to compete for a mate. And this can affect their niche or their niche. And if you remember from elementary school or middle school science, the niche or the niche is like the organism's role in the environment. Right? What is their job? So here in figure 1, you can say this is what their job looked like, right? A lot of them right here, completing this particular niche, right? Or displaying this particular phenotype, their physical characteristics maybe. And then maybe there's a lot of interspecific competition, a lot of competition with other species. You would have a narrowing ecological role, right? So, being a doctor in Morganton is probably pretty easy to find a job, but being just a general practitioner in New York City is probably pretty tough. But if you have a specialty in a very highly competitive, interspecific, ecosystem, having a specialty helps, right? So, when we go into like the tropical rainforest where there might be like hundreds of species of birds, each bird tends to occupy a more specialized function. Whereas around here, since we don't have as many different species, there's more competition within the species themselves. And you tend to see like a broadening range of what they can and cannot do. And you might even see a broadening range of tolerance. Some organisms living in an area that you might consider like intolerable for that species because there's so much population or internal intraspecific competition. It's kind of driving organisms to live in suboptimal conditions. And we'll talk more about those in detail later. This all becomes really important when talking about conservation and creating preservations. Now, competition will inherently cause or create what is known as resource partitioning. So I don't care if it's inter or intra-specific, right? They still can't compete directly over the resources. That's the competitive exclusion principle. So how do we have so many individuals of one species? How do we have so many different species if there's only so much space and water and nutrients on planet Earth? Well, it's because of resource partitioning. Partitioning means to like separate. You know, you think about the movable wall in a community center or a church that you can like move it, take it down, move it, but it's to split the room up. So resource partitioning is like kind of the splitting of resources, right? Like divide and conquer, if you will. But these birds didn't sit down at a table and say, guys, you know, you deserve your fair share. I deserve my fair share. It's the result of thousands of years of genetic mutations producing different phenotypes or physical characteristics and allowing certain organisms to be better adapted to certain tasks, right? Nature, natural selection, you know. We got three types: spatial, temporal, and morphological. Spatial makes sense, right? This little birdie, this little warbler, I'll eat at the top and you stay at the bottom. That's my territory. That's your territory. We can both live in this area together, but we have our separate places. This is spatial partitioning, right? It's kind of like territory, right? These birds have become well adapted to specialized roles, feeding behaviors, and even territorial behaviors. It's like, okay, I'll live up here and eat and breed up here. You'll live down here, and so on and so forth. And so they can all live in the same tree, in the same area, without directly being in competition with each other. That's spatial. Temporal is time. So how do these birds of prey, right? How do these predatory birds all coexist in the same ecosystem? Well, they separate by time of day, right? These birds up here are probably diurnal. You can kind of look at their eyes, and I recognize these birds. You might not. These like hawks and ospreys and things like that. You know, these guys are going to hunt during the daytime because they are diurnal, right? So their adaptations of like eyesight and their sensory developments, they still need to see, right? You know, hawk-eye vision, right? It still needs to be daylight. And these guys down here, the owls, right? They're nocturnal, right? So they have sensory adaptations that allow them to hunt at night, right? And so they can live in the same forest, but because they hunt at different times of day, they are not in direct competition for the resources. So that is temporal. And then you got morphological, which simply means their shape allows them to utilize different resources or the same resource in a different way in the same environment. So in the Galapagos Islands, the small little chain of volcanic islands off the coast of Ecuador, we see a lot of variation of finches, and the birds all have different beak structures, and their beak structures allow them to utilize different resources, different sources of food in a way in which other birds can't. So morphologically, because of their shapes, they are able to utilize different resources in a particular area. You know, the birds with the big, robust beaks are cracking open seeds that these little guys could only dream of getting into. Some of these birds have long, narrow beaks to get into, you know, those small nooks and crannies of logs and rocks to get little insects that these big, robust bugs could never, or birds could never dream of getting. And then some birds are highly intelligent. They'll actually use tools, right? And so this bird's gift is not necessarily the morphology of the beak, but its brain, right? And then some of these birds are intelligent. They might drop seeds from heights and things like that. So there's a lot of changes that allow these birds to utilize resources in a different way. They're not in direct competition with each other. And it's really important to understand these resources. Like, what does that have to do with environmental science? Because these relationships have developed over thousands, millions, and if you want to think about like little cellular microbes, billions of years, right? They've sorted this out. And so when we come in and we start to change things and we start to manipulate the resources and manipulate the environment, these relationships get put under a lot of stress, right? So it's important to understand these things. All right, and so that's where I'm going to stop with my lesson today. What you need to do now, the remaining time of class, make sure to get this done today, is, go back to your little checklist and be like, all right, okay, we did the PowerPoint. Now I need to read page 154 through 158, right, in chapter 8. So you go to chapter 8, it's a little PDF right here. You can pull it up and you can scroll down. Or maybe if you have a printer at home, you might want to print this out, that way you can write all over it. And you go to 154. Here we go. And then I get out my little paper and pencil and I kind of read through it. And I'm like, oh, wait, hey, look, I know that word. We talked about that today. Hey, I bet that's important, right? And you kind of read through this. And then once you've read it, you take some notes. You're like, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty smart. I'm feeling pretty well educated. Oh, shoot, where'd I go? Then it's time for your TQ 1.1. That's 3 multiple choice questions. I kept it really short and simple. You can use the PowerPoint, you can use your notes, you can use the reading, and you can rely a little bit on Google, y'all, but I know some of y'all pray to Lord Google way too much. Your first response to a question should not be like, hey, let me Google it. Because you'll do well in the TQs, I'm sure you will, but you're going to bomb the quizzes. You're going to bomb the exams, and it's going to be an absolute bloodbath nightmare for you, and then you are going to fall flat on your face on the AP exam as well as my class final, and then you're definitely going to suck some serious wind on the free responses, right? Because they're like short essay style. So if you see a word and you're like, oh man, I don't recognize that word at all, then yeah, for these TQs, look it up. But don't just be like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. Then if you're going to do that, get out of this class. Go take honors Earth. Go take the lowest level Earth science, because you clearly don't want to understand. You clearly don't want to know, right? This stuff is important. And that's due tonight. All right. And then I will see you guys back here tomorrow. Does anyone have any questions? I know that was a lot, and that was fast. I was recording this, so I will post this on my YouTube channel, and I will share the link in the remind. On my YouTube channel, there's a playlist. It'll say APES Zoom, and I will literally put the date and number, and so this will be recorded every single day, so you can always have that opportunity to go back and watch. Okay, no questions? Well, that's all I have for you guys. Go ahead and pause my share. I'm going to stop my share and stop recording.